For 22 years, I ran a newspaper press at night, and for most of those years, I believed the worst thing it could print was a mistake. My name's Frank Mihalik, I'm 54, and until 3 years ago, I worked the graveyard shift at a small county daily in central Pennsylvania. The first time the press stopped on its own, I was 29, 6 weeks into the job, and the clock above the folder read 3 minutes past 3 in the morning. No bang, no torn web, no jam light, none of the 24 ways a press usually tells its crew that it's hurt. 40 tons of running steel simply went quiet, all at once, the way a conversation stops when the wrong person walks into the room. I remember the sound the building made afterward, the roof ticking, the ink pumps idling, my ears ringing with a noise that wasn't there anymore. I did what a new man does, which is look at the man who'd been there longest. Albrecht was already up off his stool, wiping his hands on a rag, not hurrying, and the other 2 men on the floor were looking anywhere except the delivery table. Nobody swore, and that's the detail I'd point you to, because pressmen swear at everything. Albrecht walked the length of the line, took 1 copy off the table, and turned to the back section like a man checking a score he already knew. He read the obituary page for maybe 10 seconds, folded the paper under his arm, and said, "Run it." The press rolled back up to speed, the papers went out on time, and that would have been the end of it, except I've never once been able to leave a closed door alone. I should lay out the place because the place is half of this. The paper was the Carwin County Courier, 11,000 subscribers in a good year, covering 3 towns, 2 school districts, and every fire hall breakfast in between. We printed in a cinder block building on the edge of a town called Danfield, offices up front, press hall in the back, and a web offset press that was already old when she arrived. The Courier had bought her second hand from a bigger paper that went under, and the men who first installed her were retired or dead by the time I ever touched a roll. She takes newsprint off spools the size of oil drums, prints both sides, cuts, folds, and stacks, and for the small hours of the morning, she is the loudest thing in that end of the county. A press run sounds like a freight train that never arrives, and after a month the man stops hearing it, and after a year he starts hearing through it, the way a mother hears 1 cough in a full nursery. Night side was 4 of us, plus a mailroom crew that came in before dawn to bundle the route drops. I hired on the spring the paper mill in the next valley cut its 3rd shift, and I counted myself lucky, and in most of the ways that matter I truly was. Albrecht ran the floor, 55 that summer, a wide, deliberate man who had been printing that paper for half his life. He called the press she, and he spoke to her in the flat, patient voice a man uses on a large animal, and I never once heard her make him regret it. The other 2 were Petey, who burned and hung the plates, and a roll tender named Gus, who could sleep standing up between splices and wake for his cue like a stage actor. On a night shift, 4 men are the entire world. Everything I'm about to tell you happened inside that world, between 10 at night and 6 in the morning, under fluorescent light, to the smell of solvent and hot paper. My job that first year was the folder end, catching copies, checking register, pulling samples for the office upstairs. So after the restart that first night, it was nothing at all for me to take a copy of my own off the table and turn to the page Albrecht had read. Page B6, obituaries, and I knew there were supposed to be 5 that night, because the proof sheet was still clipped to the light table with 5 names on it. The printed page had 6, spaced clean, nothing crowded, the extra 1 sitting 3rd from the top as if it had been set there all along. It was for a man named Harold Voss, 81, of Millbrook Township, and it said he had died peacefully at home on a Sunday, arrangements pending with a funeral home 2 towns over. We were printing Wednesday's paper. Between the Wednesday in my hands and the nearest Sunday in either direction, one of them hadn't happened yet. I checked the proof twice, and when we washed up I checked the plate itself, tilting the aluminum under the light and counting the etched columns like a man counting his own fingers. 5 obituaries on the plate, 6 on every printed copy stacked on that table, 30,000 of them, give or take. Petey checked my count, and then he checked my face, and then he walked away wiping his hands, and Gus looked at the ceiling, and that was the whole conversation, which should have told me plenty. A press prints what's on the plate the way a shadow follows a shape, and I'll say this part plainly because it's the part I'd have laughed at once. The plate had 5 and the paper had 6. I folded my copy into my lunch box and said nothing, because 6 weeks into a union job, a man does not tell his foreman that the press is printing extras from nowhere. That Sunday, Harold Voss died at home in Millbrook Township in his sleep at 81. His family's notice ran in Tuesday's paper, typeset the ordinary way by the ordinary people upstairs, and I read it coming off the web, and then I went and stood by the roll stand for a while. It matched mine word for word, comma for comma, down to the funeral home 2 towns over. Not close and not similar, but identical, and I know because I checked my lunchbox copy against it about 10 times that week. I was 29 years old that spring, and I stopped sleeping well, and I never entirely picked the habit back up. I lasted 2 more weeks before I asked. It was just Albrecht and me at the wash-up sink at the end of a shift, and I asked him, quiet as I could get it over the running water, who had set the 6th obituary that Wednesday night. He shut the tap off, and he dried each finger like the towel had numbers on it, and he looked at me long enough that I heard the clock above the folder tick twice. Nobody sets it, he said, it comes up with the run. It took me a second to catch the tense of that, because he wasn't describing one strange Wednesday, he was describing weather. Then he gave me the rules, and he gave them in the order of a man who has had to use them. When she stops on her own, the senior man takes the walk and reads the page, only the senior man, so the fewest possible men are carrying it at any one time. You'll read one eventually anyway, he said. Copies go out by the 1,000, and he wasn't going to stand there and pretend a grown man wouldn't look. But the name never gets said out loud inside that building. The page never gets marked or pulled or held back, and nothing ever leaves your mouth in the direction of the family. Reading is a thing that happens to you, he said. Warning is a thing you do. She allows the one, he said, and then he hung his towel on the bar like the conversation was over, and I made the mistake of asking what happens if a man warns somebody anyway. The water pipe ticked. Albrecht looked at the drain for a while. There was a pressman here before your time, he said, name of Emil, and I'm keeping the rest of that name to myself the same way Albrecht kept it, so you'll have to forgive me. In the fall of 1989, she stopped and printed the obituary of a young mother from out toward Harmon Run, and Emil knew her, because his wife bowled with her on Thursdays. Emil carried it home and chewed on it for one whole day, and then he did the decent thing, the thing every one of us wants to believe we would do. He told the woman's husband to get her looked at fast, and he wouldn't say why, and the husband was frightened enough by Emil's face to listen. The woman lived. As far as Albrecht knew, she was a great-grandmother now, out in Ohio someplace, and had never learned a thing about any of it. 6 nights later, the press stopped again, the only time anybody could remember her stopping twice in the same month, and the 6th obituary on the page was Emil's. 8 days after that, a full roll shifted on the dolly ramp during staging, and Emil was on the wrong side of it, and Albrecht never said more about it than that, and neither will I. The notice Emil's family sent in ran the following week, and it matched, and after that no one at the Courier ever warned anybody about anything again. I asked him the other obvious thing, which was why run the page at all, why not drop the edition in the baler and print clean off the same plates. He said they tried exactly that once, years before, for a man the publisher was fond of. The second run had the obituary too, and so did the third, and the plates were clean all 3 times, and the man was gone by the weekend regardless, and the paper was 4 hours late. She isn't asking permission, Albrecht said. She's being courteous, giving folks their few days, and the least we owe her is not to make her regret the courtesy. Then he went home, and I stood in that concrete room with a machine the size of a rail car, and for the first time it felt like a stall with something sleeping in it. Here's the shape it settled into over the years, because a thing like that does settle, and the settling is its own kind of awful. She stopped 4 or 5 nights a year, no pattern I could ever tie to season or page count or weather, and always at 3 minutes past 3, always the back section, always page B6. Always 1 extra, never 2. The names were always local, always inside our little circulation map, and the death dates were never more than 8 days past the printing. Old people mostly, the same as any obituary page, and on those nights the crew found reasons to be busy at the far end of the hall. Gus would start a splice he didn't need. Petey would discover a flaw in a plate for the following night. And the senior man took the walk and read and said run it, and the sound of 40 tons coming back up to speed was the whole building exhaling and changing the subject. What I never got used to was the courtesy of it, the way she waited for the exact minute when the county was as asleep as it ever gets, as if she'd rather nobody caught her at it. There was the stop night in my 12th year that printed the cook from the all-night diner out on the state route, a man who had fed half our crew at 4:30 in the morning for decades. For 8 days I took my eggs at his counter and said nothing, and on the 9th morning the diner was dark, and a paper sign on the door said closed for a family matter. His notice ran that Thursday, and it matched, and the diner reopened in the spring as a vape shop, and I have never once been inside it. In the beginning I thought of it as the press knowing things, and that framing let me sleep because machines know things, gauges no pressure, meters no current. It took me years to even ask the question underneath, the one I still can't answer, which is whether she read the county's future or wrote it. In my 9th year, the page finally handed me a name I knew, and every rule Albrecht gave me turned from a story into a harness. Carl Prentice, 66 of Danfield, my neighbor 2 doors down, the man who plowed my driveway every winter without being asked and waved off every folded bill I ever tried to hand him. The obituary said he died at home on a Tuesday, said arrangements were pending, and it was a Friday night when she printed it, which gave him 4 days and gave me 4 days of knowing. I got home at 7 that morning and his kitchen light was on, and I stood on my own porch with my keys in my fist and watched him move behind the curtain, making coffee, alive as anything. Here's what I've never told anyone, I rehearsed it. Carl, go see a doctor today, tell them your chest has been strange, lie to them if you have to. I had it worded and reworded by sunrise, standing there in my ink clothes with my breath showing. And then I thought about the young mother out by Harmon Run who got to grow old, and about a roll of newsprint that weighs as much as a pickup, and about my wife asleep behind the door at my back. I went inside and I ate a breakfast I don't remember eating, and I did not knock on Carl Prentice's door, not that day, not the whole weekend. He died Tuesday morning in his recliner with the television on, and his daughter found him at lunchtime, and I heard it over the fence from another neighbor, hours old, already softened into news. The notice his family sent in ran on Thursday, and it matched mine, except the families carried a photo of Carl in his fishing vest. Hers had never carried a photo, not once in 9 years, and somehow the photo was the part I couldn't stand, because the photo was the part only people would have thought of. I'll be fair to the man I was and say it straight. I don't know that a warning would have bought Carl 1 extra hour, and I knew exactly what warnings cost at the Courier. But I had mowed my grass line up against that man's grass for 9 years, and I let him die with 4 days of it sitting in my chest, and the rule held that week because I held it. That's the true shape of the rule, and it took Carl to teach me it. It was never the press holding us back, it was each man holding himself. After Carl, 2 things started, and I kept both of them until the building closed. The first was the notebook, a cheap flip pad under the tap wrenches in my toolbox, with a rubber band around it and nothing written on the cover. Date of the stop, name on the page, the death date she printed, the date the family's notice actually ran, and how close the 2 texts came. 48 stops in my 22 years going by that pad, and the match was perfect every single time, and I mean perfect in a way that machines aren't and people never are. A widow's maiden name that the family misspelled in their own notice and corrected the day after. She'd had it right the first time, days ahead. A man whose obituary said he passed surrounded by family, printed 3 days before his sister flew in unannounced, on a whim she never did explain to anybody. Never a cause, never an accident spelled out, never one detail a person could act on, and I came to believe that was deliberate, the way a careful lawyer is deliberate. Nothing to warn with, nothing to prevent, just the fact of it early, like a paper that couldn't stand to be scooped, not even by God. The second thing that started after Carl was the funerals. If I read a name on a stop night, I went to the service, on my own time, in my one good jacket, and I stood at the back, and I never once signed the book. My wife thought it was a kindness. It was closer to paying a toll. 40-some funerals, Lutherans and Methodists and nothing in particulars, and at every one I knew the single thing the family never would, which is how early the notice had really run. Albrecht turned up at 3 or 4 of them, always also at the back, always with his hat in his hands. We never sat together and we never spoke inside a church, and we never talked about it afterward, and I understood that this was also, in its way, part of the rule. Years went by the way night shift years go, fast through the middle and slow at both ends. Petey retired to a lake he'd been describing for 2 decades. Gus's knees moved him to days in the mailroom, and new men came in 1s and 2s, and mostly the press hall shed them within a year. The ones who stayed learned the way I had learned, by standing in a room gone all at once quiet at 3 past 3, watching the senior man take his walk. In my 16th year we hired Tyler, 23 years old, earbuds and energy drinks and a clean splice from his first week, and I liked him carefully, the way a man likes his own younger self. On his first stop night he did just what I had done years before, waited out the restart, pulled his own copy, found B6, and I watched his face do whatever mine had done in that same spot. And I heard my mouth give him Albrecht's rules and Albrecht's order. The senior man reads, the name stays inside the building, nothing leaves your mouth toward the family. Reading is a thing that happens to you, I heard myself say. Warning is a thing you do. He asked if this was something the old guys ran on new guys, and I told him I'd hoped that once too, and to go count the columns on the plate in the morning, and he counted, and he never asked again. That's how a rule outlives everybody who made it, not through enforcement, but because sooner or later every man in that hall reads a name, counts 8 days, and stands at the back of a church. Albrecht worked longer than anybody guessed he could and retired in my 17th year, at 72, with a sheet cake in the mailroom and a press drawn on it in blue frosting. He shook my hand in front of the whole crew and said, the senior man reads, and everyone laughed like it was a joke about seniority, and the 3 of us who knew better did not laugh. He still came around some nights, the way old pressmen do, standing at the rail with his coffee, listening to her run, telling me she sounded rich on the top end and to check my folder tapes. 4 more years of that, and I let myself believe we would both just grow old like this, him at the rail, her running, me on the floor, the county getting its paper. Then came a cold stop night in March, my 21st year, and at 3 past 3 the hall dropped into that sudden church quiet, and every man on the floor turned and looked at me. I took the walk, the taped seam in the concrete, the drip pan by Unit 4, the smell of solvent and hot paper, 16 steps I could have taken blind. I pulled a copy off the table and I turned to page B6, and I counted 6 obituaries, and the third one down was Emmerich Albrecht's. Emmerich Albrecht, 76, of Danfield, retired newspaper pressman, died at home on a Sunday, survived by a brother in Ohio, arrangements pending. The hall was silent behind me, and I could feel Tyler and the others not looking at me, the way I had spent 20 years not looking at Albrecht's back on nights exactly like this one. I stood there with the page open long enough that Tyler finally said my name, once, very quietly, like a question he did not want answered. And I heard my own voice say, run it, and it did not sound like my voice. It sounded like the room saying it through me. She rolled back up to speed, and I folded the paper under my arm the way I had watched him fold it 100 times, and I finished the shift, and I could not tell you one other thing about it. I drove to his place at 8 the next morning, and I'll be exact about my intentions. I had none I could name, and any man who claims he'd have known his own is lying somewhere. He was out on the porch in the March cold like he'd been told company was coming, 2 mugs set out on the rail, and the second mug was already full. I got one boot onto his bottom step, and he said, "Don't say it, Frank." It wasn't a guess, and it wasn't a question, and I never did learn whether 40 years of stop nights teaches a man the smell of his own, or whether she had found a way to be courteous to him directly. We drank the coffee, and we talked about folder tapes and Tyler's splices and the owners, who had lately started writing reviewing print operations in their memos, a phrase with a smell to it. He told me about the night the press crew got their own picture in the paper, back in 1960-something, and he laughed until the mug shook, and neither of us said the other thing. At the bottom of the steps, with my hand on the truck door, I turned around, because there was no rule left that covered what I was allowed to feel, and I asked him if there was anything he needed. "Watch her for me," he said. "She's been here longer than either of us, and she'll want a man who knows her sounds." 8 days after the stop, on a Sunday morning, his brother drove down from Ohio and found him in his chair with the radio on low. The notice the family sent in matched hers word for word, except the brother added one line about how a marriage could fix anything that had a motor in it. Which was true and which she had left out, and I've thought a long time about why, and the kindest answer I have is that she only ever prints what she is sure of. I was a pallbearer, and it rained the way it does in a Pennsylvania March, and the whole night crew came in church clothes with ink at the cuffs, and I have nothing else to say about that week. The end of the Courier's press came the way it came for 100 small papers, not as a decision anybody announced, but as a memo about a decision already made somewhere else. Printing would move to a consolidated plant 3 states away. The paper would arrive each morning on a rented truck, and she would be sold for scrap weight, and we had until the end of October. The company called it modernization, and the men called it what men call things, and either way, the last press run in Carwin County was set for the last morning of October. Those final weeks, every man who walked past her put the flat of his hand on her frame without seeming to notice he'd done it, the way people touch a horse on the morning of an auction. I kept Albrecht's rules with the new men, and I kept the notebook, and I wondered, in a way I made sure not to word even to myself, whether she would stop once more before the end. The pad says her last ordinary stop night, the last one with a name on it, came in September. A retired dairy farmer, 91, 8 days out, exact as always. Then 6 nights before the last run, at 3 minutes past 3 in the morning, 40 tons went quiet all at once, and the hall went with it, and every man on that floor looked at me. I took the walk, 16 steps, the taped seam, the drip pan, the smell I will be smelling the rest of my life. I pulled the copy and I turned to page B6, and I counted the obituaries, and there were 6. The third one down had no name. The place where the name goes was right there, the type bolded the way her extras always sat, but the line itself was blank, one clean bar of white, exactly as wide as a name would need to be. 51 years old, it said, of Danfield, a pressman for 22 years. Died at the Carwin County Courier Press Building, it said, on the last day of October, which was 6 days out, which was the morning of the final run. I was 51 that fall. I had been a pressman for 22 years. And I stood there in the quiet and ran the arithmetic on every man on the floor, ages and years of service, one cowardly face at a time, and the only man in the building the numbers fit was me. No survived by line, no arrangements, no funeral home, just that white bar holding the name's place, patient as a car parked outside a dark house with its engine off. Behind me sat 30,000 copies bound for every porch and gas station rack in 3 towns, each one carrying a page 6 days early about a thing it had declined to finish saying. I thought about the bailer and the clean second run that came out wrong anyway, and the man who was gone by the weekend regardless, and the paper 4 hours late on top of it. I said, run it. But while the mailroom bundled, I did the one thing no man had ever done in that hall, the thing I have no defense for beyond the fact that the name was blank, and the blank was probably mine. I took my pocket knife and cut the 6th obituary out of my own copy, one clean rectangle, right along the column rules, and I put it in my shirt pocket, against my chest, under the ink. If she needed the whole page to make a thing come true, then I would keep 1 page short of whole in my own pocket, was the theory, if a man can call a thing like that a theory. A few readers called the front office about the misprint, the office blamed the pagination computer, and the county accepted that, because the county had somewhere else to be. 6 days went by the way a held breath goes by. I found paperwork reasons to keep the youngest men off the floor near 3 in the morning, and I told my wife, for the first time in my married life, everything. She didn't laugh at me and she didn't leave, which are the 2 ways I had imagined it going, and instead she sat at the kitchen table and turned the clipping over in the bag twice. Then she asked, very quietly, the thing I had not let myself ask, which was, if the name isn't printed yet, then maybe it isn't decided yet. Maybe it isn't decided yet. I have been living on that sentence for 3 years now. The morning of the last run, the day side came in at midnight to watch, and the publisher brought a photographer, and there was sheet cake again, because newspapers mark everything with sheet cake. The final edition was 26 pages with a picture of the building on the front, and she ran it clean, no stops, no web breaks, the smoothest run I ever stood for. I watched the clock the whole night, and midnight went by, and 1 and 2, and I let myself start to believe we would coast out of the county's history with that page unfinished. The last copy came off the folder at 3:03 exactly, and the counter clicked once and stood still, and she ran herself down slow, and the hall went quiet for the last time. It didn't read as a stop, it read as a finish, and every man standing in that hall heard the difference. Nobody died at the Carwin County Courier-Press building that morning, and no man of 51 with 22 years fell down dead anywhere in the county that I ever heard of. But she was 51 herself that October, if you counted from the year the riggers first stood her up at her first paper. And she did die at the press building on the last day of October, if scrap men with torches count, and I am telling you that for a year I made that arithmetic work. They cut her apart in November with the bay doors open, and I didn't go watch, and Tyler did, and he said it was like seeing a whale on a beach, and we left it there. Tyler followed the printing out to the consolidated plant, and he calls me some Sundays, and I always ask the same question, and he always says, "No, Frank, she runs clean, nothing ever stops." The Courier still exists if a website with a weekly edition trucked in from 3 states over is the same animal, and I take it, because a man takes his own paper. I retired the night she finished. There was nothing left in that building to be senior to. The clipping lived in the sandwich bag in my desk drawer under the flip pad with its rubber band, and for the first year the name line stayed blank, and I slept better than I had any right to. The second spring I took the bag out to move it, and there was a mark inside the blank, faint gray, off-center left, like a pencil smudge under the surface of the paper. By that fall it had darkened all the way in, and it was a letter, and the letter was F. There are 3 more letters now. R came in the winter, a last summer, and this spring. Each one surfaces slow, gray first, then black, the way a thing rises through deep water toward a light only it can see. My name is Frank. My wife has held that clipping up to the window in full daylight, and she says the name line is as blank as the day I cut it, and she has stopped saying it gently. I photocopied the clipping my first week home, and the photocopy is in the same drawer, and the photocopy still reads 51 years old, the way it always has. The clipping doesn't. I checked it against the photocopy in June, the way I check it every June, and the clipping now reads 54. I turned 54 in May. So the age is keeping up with me, wherever it is that it keeps itself, and the 5th letter is coming in slow this summer, and October is 9 weeks out. Most nights I wake at 3 minutes past 3, no alarm, no reason I could put a hand on, and I lie there and listen to my house tick the way the press hall used to tick after she went quiet. My wife wants us in Florida by Thanksgiving near her sister, and I keep saying yes and not packing, and she has stopped asking why, because she sat at that kitchen table and she knows why. In 22 years, she never printed one thing that didn't come true, and she never printed one thing a man could use to save himself, and I cut out the only name she ever left unfinished. Maybe it isn't decided yet. But if a morning ever comes when the letters finish, some 3 past 3 with the house gone quiet the way the hall used to go quiet, there ought to be a man here who knows the sounds. The senior man reads, "It's still my walk to take."